I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The walls of Buckingham Palace have witnessed centuries of secrets, but few announcements have shaken the very foundations of the British monarchy as deeply as the one that echoed through the corridors just hours ago. It took less than 3 minutes for a single official statement to shatter the fragile peace within the royal household, sending a clear and chilling signal to the world that everything had changed. With immediate effect, Queen Camilla was stepping away from all official public duties, marking a sudden and absolute exit that no one outside the palace gate saw coming. Coinciding exactly with this departure was a sudden release of newly revised Regency Guidelines, a set of strict legal protocols designed to redefine who holds ultimate royal authority if the sovereign ever becomes incapacitated. There was no grand ceremony to mark her departure, no gradual transition period to soften the blow, and absolutely no expression of gratitude for her years of service. One brief notice was pinned to the palace gates, one heavy oak door closed, and in an instant, the institution confronted the exact constitutional crisis it has spent decades trying to avoid. The timing of these dual announcements made it impossible to separate the two events, as one effectively stripped the Queen Consort of her public identity, while the other rapidly redistributed executive power directly to the heir to the throne. Inside her private sitting room, Camilla read the final words of the notice alone, her hands steady but her eyes reflecting a profound sense of betrayal. She slowly removed her glasses, placing them on the page with absolute control, refusing to let the waiting aide see the depth of her anger. There were no tears, no dramatic protests, and no public outbursts, yet the absolute stillness in the room carried a weight far heavier than any shouting match could achieve. What stung the most was the deliberate phrasing of the document, which offered no path for a future return, no suggestion of a temporary pause, and no acknowledgement of the sacrifices she had made to stand beside the king. Meanwhile, in his private study, King Charles stared at the expanded Regency file, reading the clauses that granted Prince William unprecedented operational control over the monarchy. The king understood perfectly well why this legal continuity was essential for survival of the crown, knowing that any hint of hesitation or vulnerability at the top could fracture public confidence and invite government intervention. Yet, knowing the constitutional necessity did not erase the heavy personal cost, and after signing the document, the monarch dismissed his senior advisors in total silence, offering no defense for his wife. This heavy silence from the king confirmed to the entire household that this was no longer a private family disagreement, but permanent institutional shift that could not be undone. Behind the scenes, the machinery of the crown had already moved forward long before the public statement appeared on television screens. Prince William's office had already received sealed instructions transferring crucial military sponsorships, charity patrons, and state engagements that had once belonged exclusively to the Queen. Princess Catherine, upon reviewing the newly revised royal diary, immediately recognized the deeper, uncomfortable truth that this was not a sudden emergency pause, but meticulously planned transfer of power. This profound discovery immediately shifted attention away from the dry legal language of the press release and onto the real people trapped within this constitutional storm. Camilla had lost a public role she had fought for decades to validate. Charles had accepted a devastating personal sacrifice for the sake of the crown. William had inherited immediate executive control, and Catherine found herself reluctantly drawn into a conflict she had desperately tried to avoid. Behind the sterile language of duty and constitutional continuity lay four deeply personal struggles that threatened to tear the family apart from within. Camilla now faced the ultimate public humiliation of disappearing from the very institution she had sacrificed her reputation to join, while Charles was forced to choose between the woman he loved and the survival of the crown he had waited a lifetime to wear. William stood closer to the ultimate authority of the sovereign than ever before, while Catherine, outwardly calm and poised, understood that every new duty placed her directly in the crosshairs of an internal war. For Camilla, her public role was never just a collection of calendar dates and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. It was the ultimate proof of her hard-won acceptance by the British public and the royal establishment. Losing these official duties meant stripping away the very identity she had meticulously constructed over decades of intense media scrutiny and public hostility. The Queen Consort was not merely missing a few appearances. She was losing the very ground that made her position beside the king feel legitimate and secure. The deep rift within the marriage became undeniable during a tense breakfast at the palace, where Charles reached across the table to comfort his wife, only for her to coldly pull her hand away. Camilla looked directly at the king and asked if he had known all along that the Regency Guidelines would be released at the exact moment she was pushed out. Those specific guidelines were the absolute rules governing who could legally act on behalf of the monarch during a medical crisis or prolonged absence. The king's brief hesitation in answering that question wounded her far more deeply than any official palace statement ever could. When the monarch finally admitted that he had reviewed the final draft days prior, his confession only confirmed that his silence was an endorsement of her exile. William carried a completely different kind of burden, as the prince had now gained practical, day-to-day control over state coordination, foreign briefings, and emergency representation. Yet, he was fully aware that every new power handed to his office brought him into direct, unavoidable confrontation with his father's wife. Catherine saw this danger immediately, holding the revised diary and noticing that several high-profile events once managed by Camilla were now listed under her own name. She quietly warned William that accepting these reassigned duties must never look like a public celebration of another woman's downfall, a sentiment he agreed with even as his expression remained deeply strained. During their private conversation, William revealed a hidden truth that the public did not see, explaining that the decision did not stem from a single argument or a sudden burst of anger. Internal palace logs revealed that officials had been documenting repeated and serious breaches of the proposed regency structure by Camilla's office for several months. The future king warned his wife that this public announcement was merely the final, visible conclusion of a long and exhausting internal battle for control. Princess Anne's prominent inclusion in the new regency structure made the palace's underlying intentions even clearer to everyone involved. Senior advisors trusted Anne's legendary discipline and knew she would act purely for stability of the crown, without any personal ambition or hidden agenda. The Princess Royal was placed there specifically to steady William's hand and effectively block any outside attempt to influence royal authority through the king. Camilla understood this strategic placement immediately, realized that her downfall was tied directly to a disastrous closed-door meeting at Windsor Castle weeks earlier, where the illusion of family unity finally collapsed beyond repair. The cold air inside the private conference room at Windsor Castle felt suffocating long before the first word was spoken, marking the exact boundary where the royal family's public facade fractured beyond repair. What was originally scheduled as a routine continuity exercise quickly devolved into a bitter struggle for survival, turning a technical constitutional briefing into the catalyst for the Queen Consort's total undoing. King Charles had gathered William, Camilla, Catherine Anne, and 3 senior legal advisors to test the household's operational readiness in the event of a sudden sovereign incapacity. The stakes could not have been higher, as any hesitation from the palace during a national emergency would paralyze the government, confuse the Commonwealth, and permanently damage public trust in the monarchy. William sat at the center of the arrangement, holding the draft that designated his office as the primary source of operational authority, while Princess Anne was positioned as his chief constitutional advisor. Catherine was assigned a major public role to project stability to the nation, while Camilla's position was deliberately minimized to ceremonial appearances without any real executive power. The Queen Consort stared at the document, seeing the clear boundaries written into the legal language, and realized that her decades of loyalty were being translated into total political exclusion. In a sudden move that stunned the advisors in the room, Camilla reached across the table, slid William's seating card away from the head position, and placed her own folder there instead. She firmly declared that no emergency governance plan could move forward without the explicit written approval of the king's wife, openly challenging the established line of succession. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the conference table as the constitutional lawyers looked away, terrified to witness a direct confrontation between the heir and the queen. William, however, did not lose his composure, responding with a chilling calm that surprised everyone present in the room. He slowly reached out, returned the seating card to its original place at the head of the table, and looked directly at Camilla before stating that marriage to the sovereign did not elevate anyone above the constitutional heir. The sheer weight of his quiet sentence completely silenced the room, leaving no doubt about where the future king stood on the matter of executive power. Charles watched the bitter exchange between his son and his wife without saying a single word, and that profound silence left both parties feeling incredibly exposed and vulnerable. Sensing her influence slipping away, Camilla turned her focus toward Catherine, arguing aggressively that the princess should be excluded from all future high-level briefings because she lacked independent legal status as a state counselor. Princess immediately rejected the demand, interrupting the queen consort to explain that public continuity would utterly fail without Catherine's steady and trusted presence. The secure audio recording of that private session captured Camilla stating that public popularity could easily be used to reshape the entire constitutional arrangement if necessary. Those specific words immediately alarmed the legal advisors, as they implied she viewed her closest to Charles as a tool to bypass established laws. When the disastrous meeting finally concluded, the king dismissed the staff and told his wife that they would speak alone in his private study, setting the stage for the final breakdown of their partnership. There were no polished press secretaries to protect them, no official protocols to soften the blow, and no prepared scripts to hide behind. As the door clicked shut, Charles placed a heavily amended Regency draft between them on the desk, his expression exhausted and older than his years, and demanded an explanation for her behavior. Camilla refused to lower her voice, fiercely stating that the palace machinery was systematically trying to erase her from the history books before she even had a chance to defend herself. She argued that the proposed arrangement reduced her to a purely decorative figure, while William and Catherine were handed every single piece of meaningful state responsibility. The queen consort insisted that her years of enduring intense public hostility, media cruelty, and personal sacrifices should at least give her an active voice if the king ever became unable to rule. She had stood by his side through the darkest scandals in modern royal history, and now she felt the institution was taking the benefits of her loyalty while discarding her authority. Charles finally delivered the devastating sentence that shattered their remaining bond, telling her with absolute finality that she could never stand between the crown and its rightful heir. Camilla stood up so violently that her heavy chair slammed against the wooden floorboards, demanding to know whether he was speaking to her as a husband or as the reigning sovereign. The king looked at her for a very long moment before answering that the crown forced him to be both, a distinction that cut deeper than any physical blow ever could. He explained that as her husband, he deeply understood her fear of becoming invisible, but as king, he could never allow personal affection to interfere with the legal line of succession. Charles then revealed the true reason why the palace had moved so aggressively against her office during the past few weeks. The internal preparation log had caught Camilla secretly contacting two high-ranking government officials, asking if William's operational authority could be legally delayed for a longer constitutional review. The king told her that those secret phone calls made it impossible to view her behavior at Windsor as a simple burst of emotion. She had actively tried to slow down the constitutional transfer of power before she ever challenged the heir openly in front of the advisors. Charles offered her one final, heartbreaking compromise, stating she could either publicly endorse the guidelines and maintain a limited ceremonial role or exit public life entirely. Refusing to submit to a system she believed was designed to humiliate her, Camilla bitterly chose absolute withdrawal over public submission, ending the conversation and leaving the room in total silence. The fallout did not arrive with dramatic shouting or theatrical displays of anger, but settled over the palace in a heavy, echoing silence that carried a far more devastating finality. Within mere hours of Camilla's definitive refusal to sign the updated document, her entire official existence was systematically erased from the central royal calendar. The large engagement diary inside her private office, which had once been packed with months of planned state visits, charity luncheons, and public appearances, was ruthlessly cleared of everything except private appointments. One by one, the deeply symbolic responsibilities she had spent decades securing were distributed among the remaining senior royals without a moment's hesitation. A high-profile literacy reception, which had been the crown jewel of Camilla's personal advocacy work, was immediately transferred to Princess Catherine's schedule, while a significant military charity visit went directly to Princess Anne, a prestigious diplomatic event at the palace, which would have seen Camilla host foreign dignitaries alongside the king, now set firmly under Prince William's office. This was not a temporary suspension or a brief medical pause, but a permanent structural realignment taking shape in real time, proving that the machinery of the crown waits for no single individual. When Camilla ran her hand across the blank white spaces of the diary and quietly asked her secretary if even her favorite hospital visit had been reassigned, The aide could only nod in silent confirmation, driving home the reality that her erasure was complete. The physical symbols of her authority vanished before the emotions could even catch up, as her specially reserved ceremonial vehicle was returned to the palace pool and her dedicated security detail was sharply downsized. In a desperate bid to prevent a permanent and public war through the British press, Prince William requested a strictly confidential meeting with Camilla, ensuring no staff, secretaries, or media advisors were present to document the exchange. When the future king entered the drawing room, he did not carry defensive briefing notes or legal binders. He simply closed a heavy oak door, looked at the woman who had married his father, and sat down opposite her. The conversation that followed stripped away all grand constitutional terminology, forcing both individuals to confront decades of unresolved family tension, deep-seated mistrust, and the fragile state of Charles's current reign. William made it clear from the absolute beginning that he had not authored the public statement to humiliate her, nor did he take joy in her sudden isolation from public life. He explained with firm, quiet intensity that the monarchy could no longer survive under divided authority, and that a single, clear chain of command was the only shield capable of protecting the throne during a future national crisis. Camilla listened intently, the composure she had maintained for years finally cracking just enough to reveal the profound pain beneath her controlled exterior. She told William that this forced withdrawal felt as though every single year of loyalty, public scrutiny, and personal sacrifice beside Charles had been deemed entirely worthless by the institution. She had spent a lifetime proving she could be controlled, useful, and willing to stay within the boundaries drawn by others, only to find that her belonging could be revoked the moment she asked for an independent voice. William answered without a single shred of cruelty, openly acknowledging the immense pressure she had endured and the genuine sacrifices she had made to keep his father stable through the darkest eras of media hostility. Yet, the prince remained completely unyielding on the core issue, stating plainly that personal loyalty to Charles could never grant her legal authority over the constitutional succession of the crown. It was during this intense conversation that William revealed a crucial detail that Camilla had been entirely unaware of regarding the final drafting session. Several senior government officials and palace lawyers had pushed aggressively for the public announcement to state that the Queen Consort had been formally and legally removed from her duties. It was King Charles himself who fiercely rejected that damaging phrasing, insisting on presenting the transition as a voluntary exit, so his wife could retain her basic dignity without public accusations of institutional misconduct. Hearing this truth, Camilla lowered her eyes in the quiet room, realizing for the very first time that the king's long silence had not been an act of complete abandonment, but a desperate, final attempt to shield her from total ruin. Recognizing that further resistance would only trigger a catastrophic public battle that would permanently damage the king's remaining years, Camilla made her final, definitive choice. She agreed not to challenge the updated guidelines, promised never to release a competing press statement, and vowed not to engage in a media war against the heir to the throne. By midday, the news could no longer be contained within the high stone walls of the palace, escaping into the wider world and triggering an immediate frenzy across global broadcasting networks. Regular television programming was abruptly interrupted. Newspapers completely redesigned their front pages, and silent crowds began to gather outside the palace gates, searching for any sign to help them interpret the historic shift. Yet it was a single, stark image captured by a photographer that defined the true public mood far better than any official press release could ever hope to achieve. Camilla's unmarked ceremonial car was seen slowly leaving Clarence House without its royal standard flying from the hood, passing silently through a crowd that stood in stunned, divided contemplation. Television anchors described the event as the most significant redistribution of executive royal responsibility since the passing of the late Queen, focusing entirely on William's heavily reinforced position. The palace firmly refused to answer any subsequent media inquiries, repeating only that the new Regency Guidelines were built to protect the long-term continuity of the British state. That very evening, the newly unified royal family prepared to attend a major national service, a formal gathering designed to project absolute unity to a deeply unsettled country. Camilla remained entirely absent from the procession, staying in her private quarters, yet her marriage to Charles remained legally intact, ensuring she kept her titles while surrendering every ounce of her public power. As the doors of the National Cathedral opened, King Charles walked out into the flashing lights of press, flanked exactly as the new Regency Guidelines had dictated he should be. Standing firmly at his right hand was Prince William, the undisputed operational center of the modern monarchy, with Princess Catherine beside the heir as a powerful symbol of public stability, and Princess Anne positioned close behind to provide unmatched experience. A national service is the ultimate arena for royal stagecraft, and the precise arrangement of the family signaled to the world that no personal promise or emotional pressure would ever be allowed to derail the legal succession of the crown. Before leaving the palace that afternoon, Charles had paused outside Camilla's locked door, choosing not to enter but gently sliding a handwritten note beneath the wood. The note admitted with quiet sorrow that the ancient crown had demanded a devastating sacrifice that their private marriage simply could not escape. Camilla read the words in total isolation, folded the paper with deliberate care, and placed it inside a dark drawer alongside her final active royal engagement badge. She did not call her allies. She did not brief the press, and she did not ask the king to reverse the decree that had already altered the course of history. As the brilliant palace lights were finally dimmed for the night, the true meaning of the historic day became completely unmistakable to all who watched. Camilla had permanently departed from official public life. William had stepped into unquestioned executive authority, and the British crown had chosen its survival firmly, painfully, and finally.
Became an immediate personal reality. For the first time since becoming queen, she could see exactly what the monarchy looked like without her. Camilla entered her office expecting explanations. Instead, the queen consort found the large engagement calendar cleared of nearly everything